5 or so.
Nice, good.
Yeah, we've had Jai on, Robert Leader, Paul Barson from the Theatre Project. Hello, hello. Check 1 2 1 2. Check 1 2. Hello, hello. Check 1 2. Can you hear me? Are we live? The audio is there though, right?
The streaming stuff is so ridiculous though. It's funny. I was working with OBS a bunch to try to do this stuff for the streaming at the school, and it's just a virtual like cable access TV show setup, right?
Yeah.
But because it's all virtual, it's not like.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Genres of People. My name is Nick Weaver of Gain Media, Gain Music, whatever you want to call us. This is a weekly series where we talk to people who have converged and contributed to the wonderful community of Guelph, Ontario. This week we have got the great Orbaks with us here today.
Hello.
I've got to say it's a true honor having you here with us.
I know.
I've watched many of your shows and hosted you, I think, at least once or twice. And,
Absolutely.
It's a real honor to have you here, and I've been following a little bit of the podcast, not a lot, but it's been very entertaining so far. So it's great to have you here.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here. It's so bizarre to be in. We've done so many shows in Guelph over the last 20 years. And it's so bizarre to be back out in action in Guelph in a room where we primarily have as many people who would actually show up to one of our shows anyway. So
it's a weird.
It's nice to see the crew of 5 people here.
It's coming back. Full
shirts
circle.
are available at the back on the way out. Please buy something. We have to pay the bar. So.
So for those in our audience, our virtual audience who may not know, a little while ago there was a bunch of your friends got together and coordinated I guess a tattoo that everyone got on them. I happen to be a part of that as well. It's on the back of my leg, which I could not roll my pants up to show the tattoo. So
live on TV here, we're going to be taking his pants off.
Just to see the tattoo.
Just to see the tattoo.
But that was, I remember that was a dual purpose. They were trying to set a record with the most number of the same tattoos, or what was that?
Well, so this was entirely a surprise to me. I believe it was my 37th birthday, and a group of my friends had all gotten a caricature of my face, friends and acquaintances. I gotten a bunch of caricatures of my face tattooed on them. So I had no idea about it. It was revealed at my birthday party, and it was kind of it's weird. It was really cool, but it was a twofold thing, I guess. One was the idea that everybody's always trying to make me cry, which was very close, but it was just more blown away that it was such a strange experience. But the other one was to try to get a record, Guinness World Record for the most tattoos of one symbol on the same people. And we found out later that record's actually like 200 and something. So we were nowhere near actually getting that.
So sorry, what was the final number?
I think we got, there was probably close to 20 people who had gotten it, but it turns out there needs to be much, much more than that.
A lot more, yeah. I wasn't sure. I know Garrett, who was the one who was
Yeah,
telling me about
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Was telling me the reason was to try and get you to cry. Mostly was
He's good for that.
Experience. Yeah. So upon doing a bit of research on you as well, because I know we've kind of come in contact through various friends and whatever else, but I didn't realize that you were from a small town near Windsor, a small town in Ontario.
Yep, yeah, I'm from Maidstone, Ontario, Canada, just outside of Essex, Ontario, Canada.
Now, what was it like growing up in a small town? Were you there long, or was?
Oh yeah, it was terrible. I grew up in just outside of town there my entire life. My family ran a tomato canning factory. And so I was a farm boy. I didn't have much experience with, I guess they called them friends or other people. So worked a lot on the farm. But it did give me endless amounts of time to foster creative ideas and kind of run them through in my head. So I was a bit of a strange farm kid, I guess. Well, I mean, I don't know if it's strange, but I guess creative maybe, more so than you might expect. And one of the things that it did give me was a lot of time to do stuff. So, I was able to write, I was able to do art. I had written and drawn and self-published my first comic book when I was like 17.
That's amazing.
And did like a 40-page comic book. And projects like that. So, but they were all very solitary based because especially out there, it was difficult to find people who had the same interests. And it resulted, I think, getting beat up a lot by other people. So the two kind of hand in hand went together,
I can kind of relate. I grew up in Palmerston, Ontario. So
Oh,
a
I'm
small
sorry.
town.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was when I found that out, I was very intrigued by how your upbringing was and how like where you came from.
Yeah, and I mean, it was great. I had a great family, and I think one of the things that did instill in me beyond that, though, was a very solid work ethic. Mm-hmm. So to me, I always was of the idea that I was very good at doing a lot of different things, and I always wanted to try them, and it was seemingly impossible to get into a way of doing some of that stuff. Like, if you're creating, we were making videos and trying to make movies, and you're a million miles, well, not a million, but you're far away from Hollywood or even from Toronto at the time, right? To even get into filmmaking. But we were like, well, we can do this ourselves. Same thing with comic books. I wasn't necessarily close to anywhere I could foster. There was no internet. It was 1993. It wasn't like you could just go online and put your images up on Instagram and get an audience.
But we still don't have internet out there.
Right? Yeah, actually, physically don't. My dad's farm physically is the one place that they can't run a cable line through. I like to call it the cursed earth. Nothing grows. There's no internet. All of Essex County is vapid of any culture whatsoever. So, but it did allow to try and do this stuff. So I've always been like super DIY about my stuff, and I didn't really recognize it until kind of sort of thinking about this a lot endlessly now that we can't go out and do anything. Was that I think it was really like a punk rock kind of ethos without maybe even listening to the music. It was that if somebody told you no or you can't do this, I'd say, well, yeah, I can, and just go and do it and figure out a way to do it. And whether it was good or not, almost more important was just coming up with a way to figure out how to do this thing that you wanted to do.
Yeah. And I feel like that growing up in the small town, that definitely will instill that in you because you.
Yeah, I think so too. I meet a lot of people even from that area and small towns where I feel they maybe felt like they were, creatively being strangled. Like there was no outlet, there was no huge arts community, and so I think it's really courageous for some of those young people to put themselves out there that much, but it also forced them to have to figure out ways to get around their environment and do it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Exactly. So tell me, growing up, did you have siblings as well, or were you?
Yeah. I had a little brother, and he played football. And we didn't get along very well for a lot of it. But, in the end, we've actually, he would come and tour with us and stuff like that. And we actually was a pretty fun sort of, we ended up growing into, as adult men, better friends than we were as young boys.
Yeah, I think it kind of comes to that point, especially with younger siblings, where you realize, you can't just beat them up all the time, or you can't be arguing all the time, or whatever the dynamic is.
But I think a lot of that too, in some of those environments is that you're always on edge, or you're upset about something, and a lot of times it's easier to take it out on somebody who's close to you, like a family member, like a brother, and just have that clashing of heads and of egos, when in reality what you're actually angry about is your entire circumstance. That you're frustrated that you're not out there doing other things, and you're unfulfilled in other parts, and I think that comes that sort of stresses those relationships a bit more.
Definitely. So growing up, you were also into wrestling.
Yeah.
Semi-professional sort of touring and all that.
Oh, yeah, semi-professional, I suppose. I wrestled in a lot of Southern Ontario. I wrestled as the Great Orbacks. I had this, so I went through and came to Guelph and did my undergraduate I had a master's in physics and a minor in mathematics. And then major in physics, minor in mathematics, and I went right into my master's degree. So in the time between my undergrad and my master's, I went home and hung out with some of the friends I had in high school, who were the other creative people I hung out there with. And they had kind of gone from high school into wrestling school. So they'd been wrestling and they were setting up their own little fed. And so I was doing freak show stuff by then. And they were like, why don't you come do your freak show stuff at the wrestling shows? I was like, perfect. I was like, I'll come and do it as long as you can throw me through a table, because I've always wanted to get thrown through a table. And they're like, yeah, no problem. Which in retrospect, they agreed to that pretty quickly. But so I went and did that, and I kind of got the bug for live performing. And it was interesting because at the time, doing my freak show stuff and my sideshow stuff, I'd already kind of started that in like 1998, this being closer to like 2000. I don't want to say that I wasn't a great performer, but I was very academic about it. To me, sideshow and freak show and stunt performing was about learning the stunts and trying to keep that tradition alive and to do that. And as a young entertainer, I think you can get really in your head about execution of the stunt or the task or the bit. And wrestling really to me was almost like going through an improv school. It's like you learned how to interact with an audience and how to really draw stuff out of people, what they responded to and how visceral they were. And I was, of course, a bad guy. And as a bad guy, you have this great lease on you can be funny, you can take nothing seriously if you don't want, and you can be super badass if you want to be as well.
That's pretty amazing. So that's where the character sort of has developed out of, and
I mean, it became, it's an aggressive, angry character that came from being an aggressive, angry person, but also probably came out of seeing a lot of like old comedy acts as well. You've got your straight man and your funny guy, and the straight man is oftentimes a lot more aggressive, is shouting at the other person and things like that.
Right. Yeah. So I know. When I was, I guess, first moving to Guelph in about 2000 or so, and getting involved with, the punk community and the metal community and everything, I'd heard a little bit about you, and then found out you were a professor as well at the university. And there was a lot of people that were kind of, I think the reaction from me was kind of like, well, yeah, that makes sense. But for whatever reason, a lot of people were just like, really? Like, he does that as well? And I was always curious about how, like, you kind of explained it a little bit, but how that kind of came to be for you from physics to where you're at.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting dynamic. I think some people are thrown by it, and like you said, other people are like, oh, that's completely normal. Mm-hmm. I was always good academically going through high school. I had very much the viewpoint that if I was going to go on to university and I was going to pay for school on my own, which is what I had to in order to go, that if I was going to do that, then it would be something that I couldn't just learn on my own. So I picked the hardest thing that I knew that I'd experienced to that point, which was physics, and I went with that because I figured at least that way I'd be getting my money's worth of an investment in myself in doing this. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I always loved science as a kid, but I was always a weird monster kid as well. So, I loved science as much as I loved Frankenstein at the same time. So there's always that weird, like, schism in my brain of like, okay, well, you could figure out, quantum computing, or wouldn't it just be cooler if you could shoot fire out of your hands? And I mean, there's got to be a way to figure that out too, right? So, I grew up watching Doctor Who and all that stuff. And I was lucky enough that I was born with an incredible brain that could grasp some of that stuff as well. Mm-hmm. And I would work hard enough to try to figure that out and figure out the other stuff all at the same time. So I was never a professor. I did my undergrad and I did my master's, and I got 2 years of my PhD before I dropped out to be a full-time entertainer. And then I went back in about 2009 as a sessional lecturer. So I've just been a contract lecturer for every 4 months since then.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because there's so many different paths, and I think that's it can be hard for people to know, well, should I take this risk and take that plunge and go for it, or do I kind of keep on trying to balance everything that you're doing? So it's very interesting.
Well, I've been very much always of the mind that if nobody's going to give you anything, mm-hmm. and I mean, if you want to do something, you're the only one who's going to make that happen. You can't just sit around and wait for something magical to fall out of the sky and